Hello everyone, welcome to LED series. Our today's guest is Mr. Kelvin Sargent, the Sustainable Enterprise Development and Job Creation Specialist for South Asia, based out of New Delhi. He is part of ILO's Decent Work Technical Support Team. He provides technical advisory services to 7 countries in our sub-region. Prior to shifting to Delhi, he was based in the ILO WDT office for the Caribbean, and prior to joining ILO, Mr. Sargent was employed as Economic Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and Caribbean. He has a long span of experience as an enterprise and job creation expert. And today, we would listen to his perspective on the same in the context of a new COVID era and how it is relevant for local economic development. I welcome you, Kelvin, to the program.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. So the first question to start with, Kelvin, your designation says you are into sustainable development, enterprise development, and job creation, decent job creation. How do you define it? And along with that, of course, we would like to know this particular domain and its impact on local economy as such. Over to you.
Sure. So thank you. I mean, I think we all know the importance of business to development. I think the world cannot exist without businesses, whether they are large businesses, whether they're small businesses or medium-sized businesses. It is the enterprises that create jobs. Enterprises create jobs, okay? And by creating jobs, they contribute to what we say poverty reduction. Because if people have jobs, then they can feed themselves and their families, and that in itself contributes to poverty reduction. But in the ILO, we don't just talk about enterprises, we talk about what we call sustainable enterprises. And we say, when we talk about sustainable enterprises, we say, number one, that businesses or enterprises must be economically viable. We expect that they will make a profit. Secondly, we say that they must be socially responsible. That is, that they must treat with poverty and creation of jobs. But the jobs that they create mustn't be any kind of jobs. But in the ILO, we always talk about decent jobs. That the jobs which are created must be decent jobs, which must take into consideration the rights and responsibilities of everybody, the employers and the workers in the process. And finally, we forget as well, sustainable enterprises speaks to respect for the environment.
Right.
That is very important. And I think, particularly in the context now of COVID,
Mm-hmm.
we are reminded of the importance of the environment so much. 15, 20 years ago, it was all about economy and making a profit and so on. But I think we've come to realize that we are also stewards of the environment, and we need to protect the environment as well. So that is very important. So when we talk about sustainable development, and we can link it to local development, because we're talking now about developing a particular locale, a particular community, local economic development, a regional, a state, a community. But the whole idea is that you want in that community, you want jobs to be created, you want reduction in poverty, you want people to be socially responsible, you want people to respect the environment. So in today's world, you hear people talking about smart cities. You have a local economic development with smart cities, where people are talking about businesses or buildings built on solar energy and using the environment and protecting the environment as much as possible. So this I think we need to note when we talk about local development or sustainable development.
Right. So the next point from my side would be, if it is such, and you elaborated quite well both sides in terms of local and sustainable enterprise. Now give us a bit of perspective how it has been now, particularly last 3 to 6 months in this sub-region. What do you see COVID has brought us to, and what we need to think from impact side to some kind of framework, if that's ILO thinking, and you must be contemplating. Our audiences would be really be happy to see a perspective from you on this.
Sure. I mean, I think we all know that the enterprises have been hit hard out of the impact of COVID. I think COVID has really seriously impacted on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in a way that we did not and could not imagine. Lots of businesses have been closed in all countries in South Asia, in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, you name it. Tremendous SMEs have been forced to close. And with that, jobs have been lost. People have been sent home, okay? And we're talking about now value chains, home-based workers, migrant workers have all been affected, and also the informal sector.
Right.
Let us not forget that in India, in South Asia, there is a large informal sector comprising of informal businesses and informal jobs. Okay? And when we say informal, it means that they're either not registered or, they're not recognized formally into the, registration process or the system, as the case may be. So they have been negatively affected. And that has had massive implications now for poverty, the treatment of women. We hear stories of the migrants, and we've seen on the newspaper and whatnot, how migrants have been treated, and not just in India, but other countries as well, elsewhere in the world, in Asia, in Africa. We've seen the treatment of migrants. So it means now there needs to be intervention in a number of fronts. In the ILO, we talk about 3 pillars. We talk about one, protecting enterprises and jobs. We talk about social protection, and we talk about building back better in terms of the future. So one, we need to ensure that all of these people who are affected, these small businesses, these informal workers and whatnot, we need to put mechanisms in place to treat with them. So it means now that in terms of social protection, in terms of protecting these people, some kind of insurance, some kind of assistance from the government, from a welfare point of view, need to come into play to help all of these people affected, particularly the informal ones. Okay. Secondly, for the businesses, both the informal and the formal that have lost money, that have gone under, that so much unemployment, it means that there needs to be some kind of financial assistance from the government.
Right. One
in the form of either a grant, as we've seen some countries have done all over the world, or in the form of some kind of access to credit.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about not just credit based on very high interest rate, but the credit that they are given must be quick, it must be easy, the interest rates must be low or even no interest rate whatsoever, or the loan must be guaranteed loan backed by the government, for which they can repay back very quickly. So there needs to be intervention in terms of assisting businesses to get back on their feet. Okay, and you can do it by saying, okay, if you continue to provide employment, then the state will help to support you by giving you either a grant or access to a loan or something, by linking it to job creation and poverty reduction and that kind of thing. All right? And the third point now is that, okay, COVID is here now and we need to put mechanisms in place to treat with it. But what happens after COVID? So how do we ensure that this kind of impact on businesses, on micro, small, and medium-sized businesses, on workers, on migrants, on all of these people, how do we ensure that this thing doesn't happen again in the future? This kind of massive poverty that we've seen, this kind of massive job losses and so on that we're seeing, how do we ensure that what mechanisms, in other words, do we need to put in place to ensure that this thing doesn't happen again? In the ILO, we talk about building back better. How can we build back better to ensure that this thing doesn't happen again? It's very important as we look towards the future.
So building back better is a fantastic phrase, and I think this sums up a lot of things. And this 3-pillared approach which you spoke are very important. For us, can you give some specific examples, if possible, in any particular geography, be it India or in any other country, how the response so far, in particularly in last 2-3 months, you must be working with government, we must be working with a lot of other partners. So how this, I think one is these 3 pillars, but within that, anything specific that been done as as at a programmatic level or at a schematic level, that would be very helpful, Kelvin.
Yes, so and I think all the countries in the world, and I think to be fair, that the governments of the region, I think in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal and whatnot, if I'm to stick to South Asia, and even if we go to the United Kingdom, we've seen that there have been interventions from the government. And if we, even in the USA, we heard about a large package of so many trillions of dollars that was, put in place to protect, to intervene, because we recognize that, look, this is an act of God. I mean, who would have known that this thing was going to happen? Right. So this is something that we didn't plan for. Exactly. And tremendous jobs have been lost. Tremendous businesses have gone under. They have failed. Some of them may start back. Some of them may not come back. Mm-hmm. So I think in India, for example, the government introduced a number of measures. We heard about the Minister of Finance, number one, talking about issues in respect of poverty reduction, providing grains and food to the people, the less fortunate, the vulnerable people, to treat with all of those people, the migrant workers, and providing food and grain and whatnot. And I think the minister also talked about, a package of support for the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, providing so much crore dollars into the system, linking it to the banking system, very important, and the financial system, okay, so that the Reserve Bank of India, I think also working very closely with the commercial banking and the financial sector, have tried to put in place measures in terms of the interest rate and lower interest rate, and making it easier in terms of access to lending for these micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises to be able to go to the banks and financial system to get a loan and whatnot, a soft loan and that, those kind of issues. So putting in place measures and mechanisms to assist the private banking, the private sector, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, all of these are things that we've seen that has happened in some countries. So some countries have also given grants as well, mm-hmm. grants to the sectors, the micro, small, and medium-sized sector. Governments have given them a grant of so much money to start their business. In America, in the USA, lots of businesses were given small business grants to ensure that their business stay afloat. I think in Nepal as well, the government offloaded a package of measures for the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises so that they can continue to provide jobs, that they can stay afloat, and so on and so forth. Of course, the issue really is the impact, because we're not sure all of these measures and so on that has been implemented in India and all over, has it really impacted? Is it reaching those that it is meant to reach? In other words, is it trickling down in the way we would like it? Right. I think we need to do an assessment post-COVID, because we don't know yet if it is trickling down, if it is reaching the people that we would like to reach, but we need to do an assessment. And I didn't even talk about the rural sector, because the rural sector is a whole area in itself. Talk about agriculture and the agricultural sector. As you know, that India is a very large country that depends very heavily on agriculture and the rural sector. Lots of jobs are created in the rural sector. And I know that in India as well, a full package of measures was offloaded for the rural sector and rural women, let's not forget women and women entrepreneurs. Right. And therefore, all of these are measures and packages that have been offloaded to try to support, to stabilize, to ensure that, people don't really go into tremendous levels and amounts of poverty. But we at least try to protect, to stabilize, to ensure that people can get food on the table and whatnot, and in this whole process of uncertainty, which continue to be there for all of us.
Right. So well put, Kelvin. See, you brought 3 points. So one is, of course, you connected it to the local. You've been using the word informal, and you also spoke about women. Of course, you spoke about agriculture in the context of India. So when I see this women and farmers in the context of India, in the context of local, I think India has spent a huge amount of resources in building this social capital as such. So in post-COVID, we particularly believe that this has emerged as a good foundation for India to expedite the process of recovery, or expedite the process of doing something better and more sustainable in the context of COVID. So what your suggestions when you see India's social capital of millions of self-help groups, hundreds or thousands of farmer producer groups, as ILO who is very concerned about the informal side of the story or the local side of the story. How do you see this from intervention point of view or from creating impact point of view in this context?
Right. So I think now it's one thing to put a lot of money and so on in the system, but we have to ensure that it reaches the right people. Right. Okay. Impact becomes very, very important. So yes, high levels of unemployment, more than 40% of are self-employed, large levels of informality and whatnot. But I think we need to understand, one, that enterprises can be a good mechanism for women economic empowerment. Okay, I think now we need to channel and ensure that the resources that we put out there, that social capital that you talk about, goes into certain places. One, we have to ensure that it goes into value chain, promoting rural enterprises. We can talk about green business development, food processing. Okay, we can talk about boosting productivity in enterprises through better management practices. Okay, you can talk about skills development and market research. All of these things I think we need to look at. I think we need to ensure that that social capital that we're putting out there creates what we call new innovative businesses. Creative businesses, okay? Businesses that are based, number one, now they have to learn how to blend technology. It's not just business as usual. They have to learn how to use technology. Okay, information, communication, and technology. In today's world, I mean, even look at us. We can't be face to face. We have to talk to each other via video or webinars, the case may be. So it means that even the businesses themselves now need to become innovative, need to use the technology to sell, to market their products. So creativity, innovativeness, that capital, some capital needs to go into there. All right. Skills development. All right. Training development, capacity development are some of the areas I think that we need to look at as we try to build that social capital, going forward in the future.
Right. Two questions, Kelvin, you're speaking so well. So I'm excited to ask you more questions. First question is around social inclusion a little bit. I'll come to that question. And second question is about skill, which is skill building, which is ILO's forte. In that sense, you've been doing that for years or decades. So the first part of social inclusion in India, we've been seeing a lot of job losses happening with scheduled caste or, as you know, the backward communities. So within that context, when we see this massive problem of COVID impacting the people who are really underprivileged, who are socially backward, any thoughts on that? How we really bring them to mainstream quickly? Because they've been pushed back again to the poverty, and millions of them. Any thought on that? I don't need a framework, approach, or intervention, but what do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. I think, unfortunately, because of COVID and whatnot, because jobs have been lost and people have had to go back to their homes, to their communities, to their villages and whatnot, we expect that, people have been affected and communities have been seriously affected in terms of poverty and whatnot. So it means that there needs to be intervention from a social point of view now. So this is where the government has a social responsibility to assist these people. One, in ensuring that they have food to eat, food on the table, right? So they need to ensure that there are mechanisms and systems in place linked now to your local community and your local development. There's a role for everybody, the cooperatives, the state governments, okay, the social and community-based organizations, your faith-based organizations. I think they all have a responsibility in trying to reach out to these people to ensure that they are taken care of, in terms of their basic needs. But there's also a protective need to ensure that, you rightly said, in these poor, backward communities, and I don't like the word backward, but in these poor communities, we have to take care of them. We have to take care of these people. So they have to be protected. Because of COVID, we have to ensure that they have the necessary, they understand what it is to wash their hands, what it is to wear a mask, what it means as we try to bring the rate of infection down. So there's a responsibility for the state governments, the community-based organizations, the faith-based organizations, the cooperatives, organizations like SIWA and others have a role to play, in trying to treat and assist these people to survive. But more importantly, as we try to build back better, the importance of education for these people will become important. Education and skills training will become very important for these people who are we talking about that may be left behind if we don't properly educate and ensure that the education system and the skills training system brings them in the net and get them to understand what it's all about.
I'll come to skill because you put that into the perspective now, and my question was, of course, around that. The context I'm trying to set is for even ILO, major skilling was around manufacturing and job-oriented, industry-centric. Of course, ILO has done a lot of work on the agriculture space. Particularly in COVID, rural agriculture has become the sector where we need to invest, as you touched upon value chain development and all that. So at agriculture as a sector, building skills and building skill in this world where you cannot have a physical presence. So we are in a Zoom call today and we need to see this happening next 6 months, 1 year, God knows how long. In that context, for skilling farmers, women in rural areas, in agriculture sector, how does ILO contemplate this and plan it out in coming days?
Right. So I think it's a very important question, and you're quite right that when you say, well, we can't have face-to-face interaction, and whatnot. So what do? This is where the technology will come in. Mm-hmm. So this is where the training will have to take place using the technology. And in the ILO, what we've already done is we have already repurposed our training. Okay, all our training, we've already repurposed this for an online environment. So for example, we have a package we call Start and Improve Your Business.
Yeah.
Which is about training and skilling people to develop and to be businesses and to start how to start a business, how to manage a business, how to grow a business. And we are doing it online. We already have done a lot of training and whatnot. We have a series of master trainers that we have trained all over India, and they have been working with the community, okay, and the beneficiaries in an online environment. So I think this is where we need to go in terms of the technology. Number one, the training and skills development has to be online, okay? But even getting them to understand financing and accessing finance, how to use a bank card, okay? How to, instead of going to the bank and holding cash and whatnot, we also need to get them to understand financing in a different point of view, using the technology, using the banking system, using internet banking, ensuring that they can afford internet banking would be very important. Using their cell phone. How can you use your cell phone, okay, to pay? And all of these things, I think, are the way that we need to go in terms of innovation, using the communication, the ICT technology and whatnot, to get to the rural communities, to get the villages, to get to the women entrepreneurs. I think that is the way to go. It has started. Some organizations like SIWA and others have started to make inroads into doing and building using the technology and the financial architecture. But I think we need to do a lot more going forward in the future. If we accept that we don't know how much longer we're going to have a lack of face-to-face and other kind of interaction, but people need to continue working, we need to continue having jobs, and we need to ensure that poverty is alleviated. And that is why I think the importance of technology and technology development, using technology to market your services, okay? So this is why now online business is so important. I can stay in my home and I can order.
Yeah.
I can stay in my home and I can buy. Yeah. And this is why it has become so very important. And I think we need to train and equip our people with these kind of skills going forward in the future.
Fantastic. With the next quick question around this is, we have missed one particular segment which is very critical in this domain is private sector. You use the word responsible business, use the word technology, innovation, of course, job creation. All of these elements are somewhere or other linked to private sector. What is your viewpoint, suggestions for private sector at this point as ILO?
Well, I think for the ILO, the private sector for us is very important. We are the only tripartite organization in the United Nations in that we work with the government, we work with the employers associations, and we work with the workers or the trade union associations.
Right.
So for us, the employers association and its nexus to the private sector is critical. Okay, the private sector has a critical role to play, okay, in terms of development, in terms of job creation, in terms of protecting its staff and resources in this environment of COVID. So number one, very important, we've been talking in the ILO about business and human rights. That business and human rights is important, that as businesses, we need to understand that you have a responsibility as a business, okay, to your staff, to your people, to ensure that they are protected. Whether it means, therefore, people may have to work at home, that is important. But even if people have to come to work, you have to ensure that you have the protection in place to ensure that they're not affected, from social distancing to wearing of masks to understanding why you need to wash your hands. Okay, these things are very important for the private sector. But also treatment, not just, in terms of washing your hands and protection and whatnot, but we talk about the treatment of workers. Now more than ever, workers need to be treated with dignity and respect. Absolutely. Respect for the labor laws, respect for fundamental principles and rights at work. We in the ILO, we are very much gung-ho on fundamental principles and rights at work.
Right.
Respect for women and women workers, okay, treating women with dignity and respect, right, no matter where they come from in life. So that is very important. Another important point we talk about in the ILO is responsible supply chains. Mm-hmm. That as a large company where I have supply chains and whatnot, mm-hmm, we need to be responsible. We have a responsibility to the supply chains to ensure that, one, that the workers are protected, mm-hmm, but more importantly, that the supply chains are paid, that they are paid on time, right, okay, that you have proper procurement policies in place. All of these things are very important, right, so respect, building fundamental principles and rights and work. And, even the government has a responsibility in times of COVID. I know you talked about the private sector, but governments linked to the private sector can ensure what we call procurement policies, ensuring that government institute procurement policies for the micro, small, and medium-sized businesses to ensure that they also can get government contracts and they can get, into the system so that they can continue to provide jobs, and create employment. Okay, we can talk about also ensuring you have preferential treatment for women entrepreneurs, okay, and youths, young people coming out of school. So many young people coming out of school every year. What do we do with them? Right. We have to ensure that they have jobs. There's a role for the private sector in taking these young people in terms of we're talking now about apprenticeship, mm-hmm, and mentorship, okay, and skills training. So all of these now I'm saying that, the private sector is very, very important. But the approach has to be integrated. One size does not fit all. You can't use one thing and say it will work for everybody. Yeah. One size does not fit all. It has to be an integrated approach, taking into consideration the role of government, the role of the private sector, okay, the respect for rights and all of these kind of things, mm-hmm, okay. I think we need to ensure that the approach must also, as we in the ILO, we talk about social dialogue. Right. Social dialogue is very important as we bring together the private sector, the government, and the workers, the trade unions. We need to have dialogue, social discussion. How do we build back better? How do we ensure that people can survive, that the private sector continue doing what it's doing, that the trade unions have a role to play, that the government have a role to play in this? That's why I said the approach has to be an integrated approach, right, going forward for the future.
So what you're talking, Kelvin, if I take this, it's quite similar to what we are thinking, various pathways for local economy development. We are talking about 9 things, starting from local entrepreneurship to nutrition, to sanitation, to social inclusion, to inclusive innovation and whatnot. So these 9 pathways, in a way, when I hear you, we are almost kind of resonating what you've been talking to or suggesting for us to look at. Final thoughts, if we need tomorrow to really see that a particular geography, for example, let's say landscape of 10 villages, 20 villages, to be really come out of COVID and emerge stronger. Any final thoughts, taking your vast experience from all over the world to a very simple context of 10, 20 villages in India? How do you see this? Any final thoughts in terms of making them resilient, making them empowered and much stronger? Final thoughts from you.
I think, if we were to take all of these villages and if we want them to be better and stronger, then we need a people-centered approach to development.
Lovely.
Development must take into consideration people.
Right.
In these villages, as you say, all people, the poor, the middle class, these micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, the informal sector. We need to have an integrated approach and integrated strategy that puts people at the heart of development.
Right.
Okay. That we need to talk now about how do we ensure greater equity. How do we ensure equity and poverty reduction? How do we ensure that all of these villages that we want to assist and whatnot respect and accept that they also have a stewardship for the environment, that they have a responsibility for the environment as well. So I think, going forward, as we try to build back better, which is where I started, as we try to build back better, the development process must be people-centered. It must take into consideration that, people are important, and all policies and measures that the government and so on institute and put in place must ensure that people continue to survive. You need to have social protection, for example, and you need to ensure that people can have access to health system and access to pension, and access for those who cannot afford it to some kind of social assistance, because those 10 communities and states that you're talking about will have different kinds of people living in them.
Right.
You're going to have poor, you're going to have rich, you're going to have middle class, and we need to put in place mechanisms to treat with those who cannot take care of themselves.
Right.
So you need the social protection, you need insurance, you need microinsurance for the people in agriculture. For example, you need insurance linked to the environment, for example. You need livelihood protection. You need livelihood insurance. You need livelihood funds. All of these are things that we can do as we try to build back better. These would be my final thoughts on the matter.
Kelvin, I strongly believe, listening to you, we can actually build back better. Thank you for being with us. It was such a lively discussion with you. I think it will be appreciated by all our viewers, the candid, the straight answers by you and the explanation you have given. It was superb talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure being here today as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.